What I'm going to be talking about today has its roots in technology, but it's really about something bigger. It is about what happens as societies develop, what happens as cultures become more affluent, and we become more understanding about who we are and what we want, and how that changes the way we market and what we buy and why we buy it. In marketing, we create these products. We ask ourselves, what does the average consumer want? What do most people want? We try to create products that go for the center of the bell curve. And maybe if we want to introduce some variety, we may introduce some products outside, but it's really about the average consumer. And here's the problem. There is no average consumer. We're all different. The problem with 20th century distribution is it had limited shelf space. Now, sometimes that was physical shelf space in the stores. Sometimes it was virtual shelf space, like the number of stations, radio stations, or the number of television channels. It could reflect the cost of distributing things. It could reflect the cost of manufacturing things. But in every case, there was a limit. We only had room for the most popular things. Only the most successful products could pass the economic test of the supermarket shelf. There's only room for, say, 10 different kinds of detergent. And so we will only store 10 different kinds of detergent. There's only room for 10 different kinds of beer. So we only offer 10 different kinds of beer. And so what we've seen is just the left side of the curve. We've only seen the hits and the bestsellers and the blockbusters because those are the only products that could satisfy the economic demands of distribution from manufacturer to consumer. And we assumed that's what we wanted. I mean, obviously, if this beer is the best-selling beer, then that must be what we want. And we never considered that people were only able to buy what they were offered. We never considered, well, maybe this is not what they want. They're only choosing, if you offer people 10 things, they will choose one of the 10. But what if you offer people 10 million things? Will they still choose one of the original 10? Technology has created infinite shelf space. Technology has given us a marketplace that has room for everything. And now, for the first time in history, we can see what happens when people get a choice, not just what's available in traditional markets, but anything that is available anywhere in the world at any time. And what we're discovering is that there are two sides to the curve. It's not just about the hits and the bestsellers and blockbusters. It's also about the niches. It's also about what economists call minority taste. It's also about those aspects of every one of your personalities, every one of your tastes, that is actually not mainstream, that is not mass, that is very, very unique to you. We finally have an ability to address not just the aspects of your taste that you share with everybody else, but also the aspects of your taste that you don't. We now have the ability to serve the unique qualities in human nature rather than just the common ones. So how do you create a long-tail market? Well, the internet was obviously the biggest example of this, but I'll give you some more in a few minutes. The first thing is that if you can lower the cost of distribution, you can offer more stuff. Now, the best way to lower the cost of distribution is with technology. Technology creates virtual shelf space. If you can offer more stuff, you can then satisfy the unique tastes, the differences in our population, and there are a lot of them. This aggregate market of minority taste is what's going to define the 20th century. We are going to, if broadcast defined, sorry, the 21st century, if broadcast defined the 20th century, it was all about the commonalities in our taste, that the long tail will define the 21st century, which is all about the differences in our taste. We are going to fragment by taste, by interest, by age, by perspective. We are going to discover, we spent the last 100 years discovering how we're alike, and now we're going to spend the next 100 years discovering how we are different. Let's take this outside of these digital goods. eBay, obviously, is the long tail of physical goods. Every product that has ever been made is probably available on eBay. And if you can't find it in the store, you can probably find it online. So if you think about it, there's nothing new about the long tail effect. There's nothing new about niche markets being important. Take wine, for example. I mean, it's always been true that the wine that sells in the smallest numbers often sells for the highest price and has the most influence, right? That's because if you're a wine connoisseur, you have very discriminating taste. And if you have very discriminating taste, you want wine that other people might not want. And you want wines that are not commodities. And you want wines that are not mass market. But now we start to see coffee going the same way. 20 years ago, coffee was something that you, I don't know, you got in a can. Now coffee is something where you're becoming very discriminating about it. You understand, where the beans come from, how they were produced. You understand the labor practices, things like fair trade coffee, organic coffee, artisanal coffee. We're now becoming very sophisticated coffee consumers. And if you go into Starbucks, Starbucks today offers 50,000 different variations of coffee. If you want, you may want a decaffeinated soy organic. What do I have recently? Latte with beans from El Salvador. And you can get that. And you can get any other variation you want. We see the same thing now with organic food. Organic food is, again, the rise of discriminating taste, minority taste. Some people want non-organic, but some people want organic, and they're willing to pay more for it. We see with water. Water used to be something that you'd get from the tap. Now we're becoming very discriminating about what's in the water, what is not in the water, where the water comes from, how it tastes. We'll pay more for that as well. Chocolate is the new coffee. Chocolate used to be something that you would maybe, there was sort of good chocolate and bad chocolate, and now exactly the same things are happening. You're seeing the rise of the new chocolate industry that follows the coffee industry with where do the beans come from? How are they made? Are they fair trade? Are they organic? What's in the chocolate, what's not in the chocolate? Tell me more about the manufacturing process. And we're becoming more discriminating. The point here is that that technology makes this possible, but technology is not what's driving this. What's driving this is that there was this latent demand for uniqueness that was true, that was there all the time in our species. We've always had this demand inside for something that was just right for us. And as we become more informed consumers about our choices, we also become more different. And this is basically a factor that comes with affluence. As countries develop, as countries get richer, as consumers have more spending power and are more informed about their choices, they inevitably move away from the mass market. As they become more informed consumers, they become more discriminating consumers. And more discriminating consumers learn about their own taste. They learn about what's available. They try things, and they tend to move away from the one-size-fits-all. We've seen it in food. We've seen it in products. We've seen it online. This is not an internet artifact. This is a truism about our species. I'll give you some more examples. The introduction of low-cost carriers, airlines in Europe, including companies like Ryanair, have revealed a long tail of travel as well. What we're discovering is that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you would say, well, everybody wants to go to Paris and London and Berlin, maybe, and a few other locations. And then what happened is these low-cost carriers started offering cheaper flights to non-traditional destinations. One of the reasons these flights were cheaper is that these other destinations were actually subsidizing the flights to bring tourists off the beaten path. And so now we see this sort of redistribution of travel in Europe. And you can actually see it in the statistics that just leaving London, in just a 4-year period, we saw the top 10 destinations declining and everything else, the long tail of destinations, rising. And this is continuing. Why do we do this? Because we are able to, A, travel to these destinations cheaply, and B, have confidence that it's the right place for us. Information is allowing us to take chances. If you want to research, a small town, if you want to go to Porto in Portugal, now you can find out whether it's right. Your travel agent has never been there. They don't know whether it's a good destination, but you can go online and you can discover what other tourists thought of it, what to do, things like that. And because you have access to information, you're willing to take chances. You know whether it's right for you, and now you're willing to move beyond the top 10.
when I wrote a book with Stephen Dubner for economics, some genius decided it was a business book. Okay, and when you write a business bestseller, they invite you to come up on stage among luminaries like yourself and spout business wisdom. So as soon as Freakonomics came out, CEOs and businesses started calling me and asking me for my advice. And in particular, they'd say, well, we have this problem we think you can solve. What do you charge? And at the time, my view was, well, what I'll do is I won't charge. I'll just, in exchange for data and the ability to write about it, I'll do it for free. And it turns out when you tell CEOs you'll do it for free, you have a lot of CEOs asking you for advice. Now, it turns out I was a terrible, terrible consultant in the beginning. I completely failed to understand business. So let me first tell you a story, and then I'll try to explain kind of some of the ideas of what I learned. One of the very first interactions I had with business was a big electronics retailer who said, we'd like you to come help us figure out if our marketing works. Okay, and I said, I don't know anything about marketing. And they said, that's fine, neither do we. Why don't you come down and work with us, okay? This is a company that spent like $2 billion on marketing. And I went there and we had a meeting, and so I said, well, tell me what you do know. And they said, well, actually, since we last talked to you, we hired an economic consultant. And the economic consultants showed us that actually our national TV advertising in an ROI basis is about 4 times as effective as our newspaper inserts. Those were the 2 major ways they advertise: Sunday newspaper inserts and national TV. And they said, it's really amazing. Because of this study, we've pushed $500 million extra dollars in spending into our national TV ads. So what little I did know about marketing is that it's incredibly hard to ever figure out whether it works or not, okay, especially when you're doing national TV ads. So I was puzzled as to how these brilliant economists would have, outsiders would have figured it out. So I asked them. I said, well, how did they do it? And they said, well, we really have no idea how they did it. But let us show you the PowerPoints, okay? And these were some of those beautiful PowerPoints you'd ever seen. The big bars and little bars and lots of colors and stuff like that. And it had been very persuasive. So I asked if I could take a look at the full report. Okay, it had an appendix. And the way that these economists had figured out the answer was by doing regression analysis, kind of the bread and butter of economics, where you kind of see, when you have a set of variables and you see whether they predict in the future what's going to happen to some other set of variables. Like, so you do advertising, and then you look at what happens to sales over the next couple weeks. Right? So I said, okay, tell me about your newspaper inserts. How often do you do these Sunday inserts? And they said with pride, we do a newspaper insert in every major newspaper in America, every Sunday, and we've done that for the last 11 years without fail. Okay? And the first thing that makes you think is, how in the world can you ever know if these inserts work if you always do them? Right? Usually the way you figure out whether something works is you do it sometimes, you don't do it other times, you figure out whether you do better or worse when you're not doing it. Okay? It's very hard to learn in the setting they had. I said, what about the TV ads? Do you also do the TV ads every week? I said, oh no, we actually only do TV ads 3 times a year. We have a really big push of TV right before Father's Day, and then right before Thanksgiving, we do a bunch of ads, and then we do a bunch of ads right before Christmas. And I said, I think I'm starting to understand how those economists figured out that your TV ads were 4 times as effective as your newspaper ads, right? Because the way a regression works is to say, well, every time we advertise, let's then look over the next day or week or 2 weeks and see whether our sales are higher than they otherwise would have been, okay? And lo and behold, every time these guys advertised, their sales skyrocketed, right? They advertised right before Father's Day, and a bunch of people came into the store and bought stuff for Father's Day. And then right before, you couldn't believe how many people were in the stores on Thanksgiving and then again at Christmas, okay? And what had happened is these economists, using very technical tools and all their math, had gotten confused by the fact that it wasn't that the ads were making people come into the stores, it was that the store knew they were about to sell a bunch of stuff, so they decided to advertise then, okay? And it couldn't have been more simple, more obvious, but they had dressed it up in such complexity that they'd actually tricked the firm into thinking they had done something sensible. So I said, boy, I'm a little suspicious. And they gave me the data. I looked at the data. Indeed, when I looked at the data, when you more carefully thought about the timing issues, I could find no evidence that the TV ads really worked at all. I went back to them. I said, God, I don't know the big standard errors, but I really can't tell you whether your TV ads work at all. I'm not sure that $500 million you just tossed into TV was a good investment. I said, well, how would you figure it out? And I said, well, I don't know about TV, but let's just start with the circular, with the Sunday inserts. Why don't we you have 220 markets. Just give me 40 markets at random, and let's just stop the circular for 3 months and see what happens to sales in those markets. And they said, are you crazy? We can't not do the circular. The sales force will go crazy if we weren't doing our Sunday inserts. We have to do them. They went on, they said, one time we had a summer intern in Pittsburgh, and this person's job was to do the buying for these newspaper inserts. And the guy was so incompetent that for like 3 months, a big chunk of Pittsburgh went totally dark. Okay, and nobody realized it. And when we found out what had happened, and the CEO found out, we almost all got fired. He was so angry that we had screwed this up. We would never try that again. And so I said, well, kind of joking with them, needling them, I said, so did you hire that summer intern? And they said, no, of course not. The guy was terrible. I said, I know, but yeah, at least he was terrible in the way that you're all too chicken to be terrible, right? Because I said, what happened to your sales in Pittsburgh when you didn't do the Sunday inserts? And they looked around the room and they said, well, that's a great idea. We never actually thought to look at what happened to our sales in Pittsburgh when we didn't do the Sunday insert. They called me back a week later and said, you're not going to believe it, but our sales didn't change at all in Pittsburgh when we didn't do the Sunday insert. And I said to them, well, great. Okay, so let's get going. Well, how fast do you think you can set up those 40 markets so we can do a real test? I said, are you crazy? We can't not do the insert. The CEO would kill us if we didn't do the insert. That was just the beginning of the lessons I was going to learn as an academic trying to go and talk in a business and study a business setting. And I think the things that have really, there are 3 or 4 things that have really leaped out at me about the difference between academics and business, which I think are informative for thinking about both. The one is that as an academic, I do absolutely nothing. I'm in the classroom 60 hours a week. I'm sorry, 60 hours a year. That's why, so the week sounds more reasonable. 60 hours a year I teach. Otherwise, I do whatever I want. And it's a life of leisure, it's a life of luxury in which I am able to think about ideas all the time. And yet what's shocking is when you actually go to businesses, people have jobs to do. They have reports to file, they have customers to keep happy, and it's a very different mentality. When you actually have to do something, it gets in the way of thinking about all the things that you would like to do, all the changes you would make. I think that's a big difference. And I think that, I don't know the exact solution with business, but it's something to think about as a leader in business. So Google's solution has been 20% time. So at Google, everybody gets 1 day a week to work on whatever they want with no expectation it will ever lead to anything profitable. I don't know if it's worked for them. A lot of their best ideas, I think, not very profitable ideas, but a lot of their ideas that people pay a lot of attention to, like Google Maps, have come out of that time. The other thing that I realized coming from academics is the incentives in academics to get published, to have to answer questions 100% convincingly. That's really the secret in academics. Take a question that's not very interesting, answer it incredibly well, and that's what rewards you in academics. Okay? In business, it's just the opposite. You have 100 questions you need to answer by the end of the week, and whether you have good answers or not, you have to give an answer. Time doesn't stop for you. And consequently, it's a very different way of thinking about the world. And when I started working with firms, I was terrible because I always was trying to get really good answers instead of figuring out ways to get just a little bit better, a little bit closer to the truth. So knowing a 55% certainty instead of 45% certainty was worth a lot to the business if it was an important enough problem. The third thing that struck me about businesses is that there was an incredible opportunity in business that didn't exist for academics, and that businesses create their own data. As an academic, I have to sit back, wait for the government. I'm looking backwards, right? I go and find some old data, analyze it, and see what it means. But in business, every day, through your customers, through your activities, you generate new data. Okay? And really the cusp, I think, the interaction of business and academics today is field experiments. It's in going out and using your everyday activities to learn. Because if there's one thing that surprised me about business, it's that businesses tend to make big decisions without a lot of information and without any mechanism for feedback to try to learn from what they've done. Okay, so whenever I work in business, I always try to figure out simple ways to always, every decision you make, have a way to learn within a month or two whether that was the right decision, and to try to set up every decision like that. And you know, I talk about, in being as busy as business people are, I think that often interferes with ideas. Okay, so a substitute for ideas is just having simple questions you ask yourself, like every time you do something, to simply ask yourself, in a month, will I know whether that was a good decision or a bad decision? Okay? And the way that you learn is you don't do the same thing everywhere, right? You figure out, you carve out 10 markets, and if you make a big change, you try not to make the change in those markets. You charge different prices in different markets. When you do human resources, instead of just hiring people, you actually hire people, and then you save the files, and you look back in a year, and you figure out who was good at interviewing, who was bad at it. Okay? Simple ways to try to learn over time. The most striking thing I've found, the difference between business and academics, though, is the following, is that academics come from a perspective of saying, I don't know. Every question I ask as an academic, I start by saying, I don't know the answer, how can I figure it out? I would say I don't know is the least common phrase in businesses today. Okay? I never hear anyone in business ever admit that they don't know the answers to questions. Okay? It seems as if everyone's job is to pretend that they know the answers to questions, whether or not they actually know the answers to questions. And the challenge that I would offer to Interview is to actually try to utter that phrase at least once a day, and to the people who report to you, encourage them to utter that phrase. Because it's only when people will admit that they don't know the answers to questions, I think, that people can start to understand and ask the questions. Because you know, it's so many times, it's been obvious to me that if you would just run an experiment, you could learn the answer to the question. But people won't run an experiment, right? They won't actually get any feedback because it's an admission they have no idea what they're doing. Okay? But business is hard. Business is incredibly hard, right? It's so complicated, so much harder than what academics do. And yet, if you can never admit that you don't know the answers to questions, then you can never get better.